In episode 2, I told you about the golden years, those magical first 2.5 years at the online school where I had complete creative freedom to build something extraordinary, where children were philosophizing, governing themselves democratically, and genuinely excited about learning. But I ended that episode with a warning about systems having an immune response, especially to innovation. Today, I want to show you exactly how that immune response works, not through the obvious toxicity I've encountered before, but through something far more insidious: the systematic conditioning of educators themselves. After those early golden years, I was asked to build and lead a foundation phase team. I was thrilled. Finally, I thought I could share everything I'd learned from innovative education with colleagues who would appreciate it and in turn share with me what they had learned and were excited about. I began working with several new colleagues who each represented different aspects of systematic conditioning. Let me introduce the archetypes they embodied. And remember, these aren't their real names, wink wink. First, there was the lemming. She seemed sweet and full of potential, eager to make an impact. She was enthusiastic enough, always eager to attend training sessions and team meetings. She had nodded along during my explanations of project-based learning and assessment design, but I started noticing something concerning. She could only succeed when given explicit examples to replicate, not adapt, not build upon, literally copy. Over time, I observed a consistent reliance on replicating examples rather than developing independent solutions, a dependence that was even more openly acknowledged at times. Then there was the sidekick. She seemed sweet, often following the lemming's lead in meetings. But when I sat down with her to analyze her students' data and plan the next steps, I discovered something deeply concerning. She had no idea what I was talking about when I asked about tracking learning progressions. None. But even more troubling was how she approached teaching itself. She treated learning like a checklist rather than understanding that teaching is like knitting. Each concept must be woven together and continuously revisited. Knit one, skip one, purl. Knit one, skip one, purl. You get it. She'd teach phonics one week, sight words the next, then reading comprehension, then creative writing, each in complete isolation. Once a topic was covered, she'd never return to it again, as if children could master complex literacy skills in a single week and never need reinforcement. Her binary thinking extended to everything. When I suggested we move away from traditional spelling tests towards more engaging approaches like crossword puzzles, particularly given our students with learning differences like dyslexia, she took this to mean that we should abandon spelling instruction entirely, completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The idea of adapting methods while maintaining learning goals was completely foreign to her. It was either the rigid traditional way or nothing at all. This was a teacher who fundamentally didn't understand how learning actually works. The literacy skills needed constant reinforcement and integration, not one-week check-offs or all-or-nothing approaches. And finally, there was the veteran. She was the most concerning because she genuinely believed that she was innovative. She'd make these undermining little comments constantly. Oh, I don't really know how to use computers like you do, Esme. I only use certain applications. And then she'd laugh as if this willful incompetence was some endearing personality quirk. But perhaps most telling was her resistance to any systematic change. Anytime she needed to implement new processes to help the school scale and grow, she would dig in her heels and refuse to adapt. I remember one whole staff meeting. Now remember, there were 9 people in my team. We were all together learning through a new system. Literally, I was going step by step. You do this, then you do that, then you click here, then you click this. She looked directly at me and said, in the sulkiest voice imaginable for a grown woman, I don't want to do this. It's very hard. Think about that for a moment. She was working at an online educational institution and she was proud of not knowing technology. A professional educator complaining that learning something new was, quote unquote, very hard. It's like being a swimming instructor who refuses to get wet. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about what happened next. I didn't just throw these teachers into the deep end and expect them to swim. I created an entire ecosystem of support materials. I developed comprehensive assessment tools broken down by subject area, specific measurable criteria for every aspect of learning. I created detailed project briefs that showed exactly how to integrate multiple subjects while maintaining academic rigor. I made Bloom's taxonomy guides simplified for foundation phase specific to each of my teachers' classes, with concrete examples of activities for each level of thinking. I designed week by week project outlines with hands on, age appropriate activities. I provided templates, checklists, resource lists, everything a teacher could possibly need to implement innovative, holistic education. And here's what happened next. The veteran tried to include creativity as a rubric marking criterion. When I explained why this was pedagogically unsound, that you can't assess creativity itself, only the skills that enable creative thinking, she became incredibly defensive. She made it seem like I was the problem for not understanding her holistic approach to the whole child. The sidekick, despite having detailed data tracking templates, still couldn't understand how to analyze her students' progress. She'd look at me with genuine confusion when I asked about learning trends or areas where students needed additional support. And the lemming? She couldn't align her lessons with curriculum standards, even when I provided explicit frameworks showing exactly how to do it. There was one incident that crystallized everything for me. We had a staff meeting where I presented assessment strategies to help teachers understand proper rubric design. I showed them examples of meaningful criteria, explained the difference between measuring skills versus measuring abstract concepts like creativity. After this presentation, after seeing concrete examples of professional assessment design, the veteran had the audacity to suggest that her approach was more sophisticated because she focused on the whole child, specifically creativity. She was literally using progressive sounding language to hide fundamental incompetence and misalignment. It was in that moment I realized what I was really dealing with. These weren't just difficult individuals, these were products of a system that had systematically conditioned them to resist professional growth. You see, the traditional education system creates a very specific type of educator. It rewards compliance over creativity, following instructions over critical thinking, external validation over internal motivation. Each of my colleagues represented a different stage of this conditioning. The lemming had been trained to wait for explicit instructions. Success meant perfect replication, never independent thinking. The sidekick believed that teaching was about content delivery, not learning outcomes. And the veteran had been so rewarded by the system that she had confused her compliance based methods with innovation itself. It was like asking a librarian to fix the plumbing of learning. They had all the wrong tools for the job, but the system had convinced them that they were master craftspeople. But here's where it gets really insidious. When faced with evidence of their professional limitations, these teachers didn't examine their own practice. Instead, they did what the system had trained them to do. They blamed the person who exposed the problem. I received feedback that my expectations were perceived as too high, or my communication was never clear enough. I was being unfair by asking them to meet professional standards that required actual thinking rather than just following scripts. This is how the system protects itself, with an immune response. It doesn't just fail to develop competent educators, it actively creates educators who will resist competence in others. They form little clusters of mediocrity that support each other's limitations and attack one who threatens their comfortable incompetence. The veteran would dismiss any feedback with her false humility about technology. The sidekick would follow the lemming's lead in resisting accountability, and the lemming would become sulky and withdrawn whenever asked to think beyond copying someone else's work. That's when I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about 3 problematic teachers or archetypes. This was about an entire ecosystem designed to protect mediocrity and eliminate excellence. Here's what I learned about how the education system actually works. It doesn't just fail students by providing poor education. It systematically creates educators who cannot provide good education, even when given every possible support and resource. These teachers weren't malicious. They were victims of their own educational conditioning, trained to resist the very qualities that make education transformative: critical thinking, professional growth, innovation, accountability. Once I understood this dynamic, I started seeing it everywhere in education. Teachers who mistake activity for learning, I call it busy work. Administrators who confuse compliance with competence. Systems that reward following procedures over achieving results. But in South Africa, this conditioning runs even deeper. Our colonial and apartheid education systems were explicitly designed to create compliant citizens who could get on with it rather than think critically. The infamous Bantu Education Act wasn't just about racial segregation. It was about systematically crushing independent thinking and creating generations of people conditioned to accept rather than transform. Today's teachers aren't falling behind because they lack intelligence or capability. They're products of a system that deliberately destroyed critical thinking for centuries. We've been trained as a people to respond to problems with frustration, maybe some laughter, and then resignation. What can you do? Becomes the national motto instead of, how can we change this? This explains why South African education struggles so profoundly. It's not about resources or infrastructure, though these matter. It's about having an entire profession filled with educators who were systematically conditioned to resist the very thinking skills that education should develop. When I look at the global education crisis through this lens, I see the same patterns everywhere. Different histories, same result. Systems designed to produce compliance instead of competence, acceptance instead of innovation. This realization forced me to make a choice. I could keep trying to work within a system designed to resist improvement, spending my energy fighting battles with people who had been programmed not to grow. Or I could step back and focus on the bigger picture, understanding these patterns so deeply that I could forecast where education was headed and help build what comes next. I chose transformation over accommodation, not just for myself, but for the future of learning. Because here's what I know for certain: children deserve educators who can think critically, adapt to new information, and continuously improve their practice. They deserve learning environments designed around curiosity rather than compliance, growth rather than grades, thinking rather than memorization. And if the current system can't provide that, if it actively resists providing that, then we need to understand exactly why, forecast what's coming next, and build something fundamentally new. The education system didn't just have problems. The education system is the problem. It creates the very resistance that prevents its own improvement. But understanding this pattern is the first step towards changing it. When we recognize that resistance to educational innovation isn't personal, but actually systematic, we can approach reform with both compassion and clarity. We can have empathy for educators who are products of a broken system while still maintaining standards for what education should be. We can build new approaches that work around systematic conditioning rather than trying to fight it directly. Most importantly, we can stop blaming individual teachers for problems that run much deeper and start building the educational future our children actually need. Next time on The Bell Rebellion, we'll explore what that future might look like and why building it requires us to think beyond traditional schools entirely. Because once you understand how deep the conditioning goes, you realize that real educational transformation can't happen within the existing system. It has to happen despite it. This has been The Bell Rebellion. I'm Esme. Thanks for joining me in understanding why educational change is so difficult and why it's more necessary than ever. Until next time, keep questioning, keep building, and remember, the problem isn't that we expect too much from education. The problem is that we've been conditioned to accept far too little.